If, like me, you reckon stress and anxiety are at all-time highs, then you'd probably want to know how do you best cope with that. So I'm going to share with you what I teach my coaches about how to help people and themselves deal with what seems to me to be increasing levels of pressure out there in our culture. So we have a saying, we say stress leads to anxiety, anxiety leads to overwhelm, and overwhelm leads to depression. Because it's important that you have some kind of tool to wrap your brain around with that, then let me say it a different way. Stress, when experienced, is actually the result of the stories that we tell ourselves. Now, we're fond of saying that Fred yelled at me, was rude to me and was nasty, and that's why I'm upset, you know. She made me angry is the most common story you're ever going to hear. But it is a story. It ain't the truth, mate. The reality is I tell myself the story to justify the feeling. So when I'm angry because of what she said to me, then that's a much more accurate assessment of what's really going on. In other words, if I can just slow myself down a little bit and take a look at what's going on, I can say, you made me angry, and recognize that that's a complete distortion of the truth from the point of view of, hang on, where is the anger happening? Where is the sadness happening? Where is the fear happening? All of these powerful emotions, guilt, shame, they all happen within us. So the question we've got to ask ourselves is not what is causing the stress, because there's plenty of that, and we're never going to get rid of it. You know, if you look at the mega data, every human being is going to go through a certain amount of stress in their life. In fact, the experts tell us that you're going to have, like you as an individual, not you personally, but every Aussie, every human being is going to have four major catastrophic level, life-changing, stressful events happen every year. And of course, if you looked at 2020, you would say that by March we'd have the bushfires, the floods, COVID, massive pile of stuff all happen at once. Because, you know, if life or God or the universe is sending these disasters, it has little interest in spreading them out over a 3-month period so that we can get ready to adjust for it and take it in our stride. Usually they come bang, one up the arse of the other, and, you know, as we're struggling with one, another one hits us, we tend to say it's that. But the reality is, it's the story we tell ourselves about that. You know, if the river floods and our house gets swamped in water, then sure, we're entitled to feel like, you know, this is not a very good thing, that this is, you know, costly, painful, all sorts of things that are, you know, on the negative side of the scale. So we can be stressed about the amount of work, we can be stressed about the cost, we can be stressed about the number of people who want to help but act like klutzes, or who don't understand, or tell us that we should get over it. There's any number of things out there that we can blame. But the problem is, those stories keep us trapped in the stress. Stress is actually the refusal to accept that what is. You see, when the river floods and it overflows and it floods your house, there's no point saying, I wish you didn't do that, because it's happened already. You know, I come off the land and, you know, we live on hundreds and hundreds of acres. When it rains, the animals don't go, whoa, wish it didn't rain. They just kind of keep on eating the grass, because it's one of those things. So you might have heard people say it is what it is. That's a fair enough saying, but really what we're saying here is, or what I'm wanting to get across to you, is that stress is the first level, and if we don't handle it at the first level, then we're going to get in all sorts of problems. Because if we need for other people to change their behaviour so that we can be happy, our happiness depends on their behaviour. And trust me, and you probably already know this, people don't necessarily change their behaviour because they should. Yeah, it's true. Some people ought to wake up, they ought to grow up, they ought to change their behaviour dramatically and stop impacting negatively on everybody around them. But the reality is, they're probably not going to do that. So, as long as they continue to be the way they are, which they can do easily and naturally and not have to put any effort in it, you know, somebody being a rat is not actually working hard at being a rat, that just comes to them. So when we're in reaction, so to speak, then we're out of control, because they are determining what emotions I'm experiencing. So my life, you know, I might be at work, say for example, my work day can be stressful because of the bad behaviour of other people. because I tell myself the story that they are doing it to me. So step one in stress is to understand they're not doing it to me, they're doing their thing. I can choose to be stressed or not stressed. And when I can say it is what it is, I drop the bottle of milk, the glass is shattered, there's milk all over the floor. What do I do now? Then a logical and sensible answer to that would be something along the lines of cleaning it up. So stress isn't something that we can make go away, but it is something that we can deal with grace and dignity if we stop telling the stories about how it's being done to us and it's not our fault. So blame should be the red flag when it comes to dealing with stress. Interesting thing about stress is if we don't have a stress management strategy, in other words, if there aren't things that you do on a regular basis to bring the stress levels down, and I mean walk on the beach, go for a picnic, meditate, pray, whatever works for you in terms of bringing the stress levels down, if you don't have an active, programmed, regulated stress management strategy, stress is going to get you because you ain't that good, mate. So let's assume that you have, and let's assume that you're using it, and let's assume that you're recognizing the stories that you're telling yourself about other people making it bad for you. Look, let me put it to you bluntly. If somebody else is affecting how I feel, I'm the victim. So let me name it and shame it. When I say she made me angry, I'm the victim, and I'm the one who needs to wake up to myself. But let's assume that you got it. Let's assume that you either have a stress management strategy in place or you're going to, as a consequence of hearing me say that. Stress not handled. In other words, if you don't get on top of it, things are not going to look pretty, right? It's not going to get better from there. Stress allowed to exist over a period of time builds up into generalized anxiety. In other words, anxiety, if you describe anxiety, it's kind of stress prolonged. In other words, I'm anxious about what's going on at the moment. And if we're talking about 2020, then maybe that's got to do with COVID. Maybe it's got to do with the way the governments are handling it or not handling it. Maybe it's got to do with the idiots who are breaking all the rules because they're saying that it's a hoax or whatever that is. So stress prolonged moves from an emotion into a mood. And a mood is something that could go for a day, a week, a month, a year. And when I suffer from background anxiety, now I'm in real trouble because stress management processes don't really deal with anxiety. If you want to learn the nomenclature about this, if you want to learn what we teach our coaches, we say stress equals stories, anxiety equals adrenaline. Because what anxiety produces is adrenaline in our bloodstream because our early warning mechanism that protects us from danger is fired up full time. So we're walking around on red alert. We're waiting for something to go wrong. And if it doesn't go wrong, that's okay. We were ready. But we're expecting it to happen. You can't really survive with heightened adrenaline levels because adrenaline by itself is caustic. We can handle adrenaline in our bloodstream for 15 to 20 minutes. And that's excellent for the fight or flight syndrome because that's all we need. You know, within 15 minutes of fighting or running, you're either safe or you're dead. So we're not designed to handle high levels of adrenaline for long periods of time. The consequences of high levels of adrenaline over long periods of time, like days, let alone weeks and months, is that anxiety becomes a permanent condition. We get hardwired to be so-called anxious, and as a consequence, as a consequence of that anxiety, and being on red alert all the time, we're exhausted. And we're exhausted simply because you can't get any system known to man, amp it up to red alert and think that it's going to last. If you're going to do that with the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, then you're going to have to rotate the soldiers or the airmen or the Navy people in and out of active duty because I can only handle it for a short period of time. Because what happens is the consequence of being on red alert for a long period of time, your awareness actually decreases. So we're amped up looking for this danger that's not going to happen or isn't coming at the moment and getting exhausted enough from that to not be amped up enough. In other words, that early warning mechanism still may not do its job simply because it's just overworn. So Stress equals stories, anxiety equals adrenaline. If you allow anxiety to go on, and really what I'm saying is to get the adrenaline down, you've got to do the same things as I mentioned in stress, and that is you've got to find the things that relax and calm you. What are the things that you do that uplift your spirit, that make you, that when you finish them, you feel better than when you started? And if that's gardening, great. Well, you've got to get into your garden. If it's fishing, that's cool. Doesn't matter what it is. The problem with a lot of these things is that they require huge amounts of time, and you can't do that whilst you're at work. But you can take 5 minutes out from work, close your eyes and imagine that you're on your boat fishing, and that'll deliver you 80% of the benefits of actually being on the boat, and you don't have to get covered in the sunscreen and the sweat and the sand and have smelly fish all over you. So in many ways it might actually be better. But if we don't do the things that are uplifting of our spirit, that feel us refreshed and revitalised and renewed, we're going to go down. So what are the adrenaline reducing activities in your life? It might be taking your partner and walking around the block, or take your dog and walk around the block, go to the gym, get in the garden. Whatever works for you is whatever works for you. You don't have to justify it, you have to program it. And when I talk to my clients, I don't care what they say about what refreshes and renews and revitalises. What I say is, when are they doing it? And so if they can get it into the diary on a regular basis so that it's, Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, there's a good chance my client is going to be talking about me walking on water, because their life starts to work because they're not going down underneath it. Of course, you and I know I'm not walking on water. They're doing something that's working for them. So first is stress, second is anxiety, what follows is overwhelm. So anxiety allowed to go on morphs into overwhelm. In other words, if you think about the damage that the adrenaline does, caustically just, dissolving your veins and arteries and creating all that disaster I mentioned, then what happens is that if that's allowed to persist, we just get overwhelmed, because most of us are holding off stress and drama and anxiety by doing lots. And so most of us have got a list of things to do today that Superwoman would need a week to get done, and we're disappointed in ourselves when we don't get it done. So we feel like we're battling with the world. The more things I get on my list and tick them off, the more things seem to turn up and need doing. And we can be Supermum or Miss World or Mr. World or whatever it is, and still, we can turn up at every meeting at school. We can be there for our partner. We can be there for our kids. We can run our business, but we get exhausted. And what happens is as a consequence of overwhelm, what happens is we have the sense of being overcome by the avalanche of what needs to be done just to stay level. As a consequence of that, we say overwhelm equals overcome. In other words, overwhelm is a feeling there's more to do than I have the capacity or the resources to do. Overcome is it's bigger than me and I drowned. The wave crested over me and I went under, and I was not able to cope with that. If that makes sense to you, then what we can say is stress equals stories, anxiety equals adrenaline, overwhelm equals overcome. If overwhelm is allowed to persist, what happens is we get depressed. Depression is loss of hope. Depression is that sense that no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, I just can't get on top of it. People who are depressed will tell you that it feels like they're drowning. In many ways, that's a very accurate description of the bundle of emotions that are heaped together called depression. You talk to someone who's depressed and say, how do they feel? They will struggle to find words. I go, I don't know, flat. I've got nothing. But really, it's a bundle of emotions that's so difficult to deal with. They're already overwhelmed and they're going under. So depression equals distress. And I think distress is a great way to describe what happens to people who are depressed. And it's kind of like we're out in the ocean, we've got a life raft, but it's leaking and we're slowly going under. And our only hope of survival is to stick our hand up and say, help. In our culture, sticking our hand up and saying help is not a very popular thing. It's the reason why the Are You OK campaigns have had such kind of energy put behind them, is that we know there's a lot of people out there who are in distress. They're actually going under, but they're not saying so. And they're doing their best to make it look like they're coping. So they're not saying, they're not going out, they're not doing. And if you say to them, how are you going? They go, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay. So if you get the picture that I'm trying to paint here, depression, which is a logical consequence of stress leading to anxiety, leading to overwhelm, leading to depression, depression is actually distress. What we need to do is stick our hands up and ask for help if we're in those circumstances, if we're under those situations. And for goodness sake, if you are depressed and you are feeling distressed, it's very important that you reach out to either us or some organisation that you feel can help, like Lifeline or Beyond Blue, any of the organisations who devote themselves to making an impact in people's lives such that they will survive. Let me point out to you how drastic this is. Right here towards the end of the year 2020, suicide is up 300%. What I'm saying is actually going on out there. The reason you need to know this stuff is there are people that you know who could use it. Maybe you could use it yourself. It's more likely that you could go out there and make a difference in your family, in your community, simply by recognising what's going on. And that is to say to yourself, stress equals stories. Somebody who's stressed is telling themselves stories. Maybe I can help them see it a different way, tell a different story. Anxiety equals adrenaline. Maybe I can help them. Maybe I'm going to take them on a picnic. Maybe I'm going to take them fishing. Maybe I'm going to suggest they do that. Overwhelm equals overcome. How do we shorten the list? Delegate things, move things on, take a break, whatever. And depression equals distress. Someone's asking for help. Maybe I've just got to turn up. Do those things, and the chances are you're going to have a massive impact on your family, your community, perhaps even your country.